Hi, in this video, we're going to take a look at some issues that you might experience while trying to integrate the proof product, as well as certain things you need to pay close attention to ensure that you have a smooth integration. We're going to take a look at the proof initiation endpoint. As you can see on my screen, this is what the payload of the request to the proof initiation endpoint looks like. The customer's name, phone number, and email address, they are required, as well as the reference redirect URL, KYC level, and bank account. The reference here indicates the unique identifier that you have created for that customer. This reference is very important as it is required for making other proof API calls. We'll take a closer look at that in a bit. The redirect URL is the URL that your customers are redirected to when they complete the flow on the widget. It's very important, especially for cases where you are making use of the mono URL generated when the proof initiation endpoint is called, as opposed to using the SDK flow for your integration. The KYC level here, which is usually from tier 1 to tier 3, is very important because it indicates the level of documentation required to ensure that that customer is verified properly. The bank account field here takes in either true or false, indicating your interest in being able to pull bank account information from that particular customer. Providing false here means that you do not require bank account information from the customer. Providing true here means that you want to be able to pull bank account information from the customer. So notice how if I take out any of these fields here and I make the API call, it doesn't go through successfully, right? It throws a validation error telling you invalid request body. This is what a complete payload looks like, right? You can decide to also pass additional information like the identity, where you pass in the identity type of BVN or NIN, and then you also pass in the number. You can also decide to pass in the address of the customer, but these are not required fields and will not prevent the call from happening successfully. Now that we have all the required fields here, I will make the API call. As you can see, the API call went through successfully. An ID was generated for this request. We can see the customer ID, we can see the mono URL reference, and so on. So the API call was. The next thing that we're going to take a look at is the format of the phone number that is accepted. Notice how in this successful request that I just made, the phone number provided here starts with 080. It's important to note that phone number formats that start with 0 are accepted for the proof initiation call. However, if you provide the +234 format with a unique ID, the API call will not go through successfully. It will provide you with an invalid request body message telling you to provide a phone number that starts with 0 followed by 10 digits. So this is something that is very important to note. The next thing that we're going to take a look at is the references and why they are so important. The reference that is passed when making a call to the proof initiation endpoint is very important because it becomes a unique identifier for that customer for making future calls. Here, we have a list of different API endpoints available for you to call to get information about a customer after the customer has gone through the proof verification process. The first endpoint that we have here is the fetch customer details. As you can see, the endpoint URL here requires that you pass in the reference which was generated during the proof initiation process. When you want to blacklist a customer as well, it's very important that you have the reference of the customer because it is a required field. So the reference of the customer when initiating proof is a very important parameter. Another reason why the reference is very important is because it is required for initiating the SDK to bring up the widget for customers to interact with. And let's make another API call to the proof initiation endpoint. Within the response of this endpoint, you can see here that this ID is generated. This ID is very important, right? Because it is required to initiate the widget when you are making use of the SDK flow. The SDK takes in the request ID here as a parameter to successfully spin up the SDK widget so customers can interact with this to complete their verification process. A likely error that you can experience or your customers might experience in this process is when you are integrating the SDK and you provide the ID here to spin up the SDK widget for customers to interact with. Once your customer has completed that flow, that ID can no longer be used to start up the widget anymore. You will get this error saying that this proof verification link has expired and is now inactive. So the moment that ID has been used to verify a customer using the SDK widget, you cannot use that ID anymore. So it's very important to take note of that. Lastly, the issue of multiple initiations. It is very important to note that when you call the proof initiation endpoint with your customer's details, you should always store the ID that you used in making that API call. Just as I mentioned before, this ID becomes a very important parameter that enables you to make subsequent API calls. Why is this important? The reason why this is important is because you do not want to initiate proof multiple times for the same customer for the same tier. Failure to do this would require that you create multiple references for the same customer for the same tier, which is not ideal, right? So it's very important that that reference for that customer is stored for making future calls.